Center for Sustainability Reporting and Performance Management. And it's supported by CPA Ontario. And as part of our activities, we host events like this where we bring in fantastic folks in the field of performance management to show you, our students, what a career could look like and hopefully emphasize all that stuff we do in class. It's actually real. It's stuff that actually happens in the real world. You may not love it, but it is practice relevant, and we hope from that point you can appreciate it. So, without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Michael Matthews. Michael is the CFO at Barco. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam. And I will clarify, I am not the CFO. I am the VP Finance and Operations. But nonetheless, very happy to be here, and certainly performance management through everything I do.
I guess I just put on all those hats on you, given your work over the past year and a bit at Barco. Apologies for that. Hey, let's get started with some easy questions and then get into some nitty-gritty. Where were you born and raised?
Born and raised in Hamilton, Ontario. Spent most of my time in Hamilton and Ancaster before moving up to Waterloo area.
Okay. And then at what point in that process did you realize you were going to save the world as an accountant?
When I went I went to school at Laurier for my undergrad as a general business major, and going into school, I definitely didn't have the thought in mind that I was definitely going to be gunning for accounting necessarily. But as I was starting to figure out what I wanted to focus on, I was speaking with people that I really respected in industry through networking of like different jobs that could interest me down the road. And a lot of them, even who had nothing to do with accounting, they continued to reinforce that having a strong financial acumen, pretty much wherever you decide to go, whether you decided to go operations, in finance, sales, and you want to have more of a general C-suite path, that having that CA, that stamp of credibility, can really take you there. And so after doing that and then seeing some of the paths, like as soon as you get the CPA, I decided in second year that was going to be something that I was going to do, but definitely with the mindset that I could stay in there, or if not, easily pivot into just about any other function.
And so you were at Laurier. We'll forgive you for that one. So you're at Laurier and you're thinking, I'm going to do a career as a CPA. Is there a sort of a moment you can think of that you're like, okay, this is the path for me. I'm going to go towards more of a operations reporting, maybe away from the traditional auditing or tax functions?
Yeah, so I would say that, I did my CA through EY, and so I knew that was kind of going to be the career, at least to get my letters. But I always had interest in kind of the strategy and operation elements of business. So even when I was doing my auditing work, I was always thinking more about, the client and business development and getting involved in kind of the entrepreneurship arms of the business. And so I always knew that I wasn't going to be a partner track guy. So I guess there wasn't an aha moment. I knew that this was a tool more so for me and a foundation that I was building. And that whether I took that into the reporting side or the operations side, I knew that I wanted my first move outside of EY to be in something that got me a lot of exposure into sales, into operations, into strategy. So that was always kind of on my mind as a plan. And acknowledging that you can pivot that into industry, I could have pivoted that into consulting or many other paths. But I think that was always the idea, was to make sure that whatever I did, I was getting strong exposure and skill development in a lot of different functional areas.
And so help us understand how you go from EMY to where you're at in Barco. Like what is that career trajectory? What did that look like for you? And maybe along the way, what were the skills that you acquired that set you up for that next job?
Yeah, so my first jump out of EY, well, actually at EY, I did audit at first. And, I was very lucky in that, in my last 18 months or so, I was working in the insurance industry for my audit engagements. IFRS 17 came out and it required a lot of consulting type work. And for anybody who has any involvement in IFRS 17, especially in the early days, it was a wild, wild west. And from a regulatory standpoint, from us as a service provider and trying to provide a solution, it was really challenging. And so I really appreciated getting the experience to kind of come into these businesses that I understood from an audit standpoint and how they function, to saying, okay, well, where do these companies need to go, right? There's a very vague vision that the regulatory bodies are putting out, and we needed to be that answer. And so I got the opportunity to kind of go in and perform operational gap assessments to say, here's where you got to be, here's where you are today, here are some of the technologies, here's some of the unknowns, but things that you'll definitely need certain skills and tooling to get there. So I started to develop more of that operational skill set, and I was able to leverage that work with what you get from the stamp of getting that CA and coming from audit into a role that, for me, it was a district controller role at Waste Connections. So big public company, but it ran very decentralized, where the nodes that I was in charge of, I was essentially a mini CFO of my unit. And I can't remember the exact figures from when I started there, but got up to having between 80 to $100 million of revenue under my mandate across various different areas. And the big thing that drew me there is, okay, it's a controller role. You're kind of head of finance for your particular area. It was, and that was great because it's getting those stripes, it's building the financial acumen. But the big thing that had me go there is that I got to be a business partner with what was the district manager or many CEOs of these different areas. And it was our combined mandate to run that business as if it was our own. And it just gave me really good experience on all of those areas, both on the operational end, helping build strategy, supporting the sales function, building them tools, operational tools, and to optimize routing and reduce costs and find efficiencies, while still getting kind of that FP&A element as well. Like, I did the basic reporting from an accounting standpoint and close, but taking it to forecasting and budgeting was really cool for me because it's a new skill set. But I think that's what really helped me tie everything together, because to be an effective forecaster and budgeter, you need to get involved in the other functions deeply, and you need to understand those relationships. You need to hold accountability at those various levels, so that it's not my budget, it's each of these different business owners' budget. And like, what that was really cool is it helped me draw all of these groups together, understand the business at a deeper level. And I think in doing that, it helped me really learn the fundamentals of business and of running things effectively, and really getting an appreciation for the ins and outs of each of the functions. And I was able to leverage that experience into Barco, because it was just honestly a link that I saw from a colleague to on LinkedIn, and said, hey, if you're interested, VP Finance at the time, with a private equity company. And I looked at that and went, okay, now it's kind of more of that CFO type role. It's not a system where it's a public company where a lot of the finance functions are kind of at head office and you kind of see your more narrow version. It's okay, this is more of a true lead finance role where you cover every A to Z in the business. And I thought it was cool because it was coming from what was a family-owned business acquired through private equity. And in speaking with them, I learned that I would get a lot of private equity experience, and ideally do a lot of M&A work while also doing the finance function. And at the time, we had to move the business because the business was purchased on land that was no longer owned. So I knew that it would also fall under my mandate, that I could continue that path of getting mandate that was not official finance stuff, but that was just big leadership, project management, really having to think about how the intricacies of the business actually work. Not that pallet manufacturing is rocket science, but like, you really do need to still understand all the ins and outs, and where there's key choke points, bottlenecks, where your key dependencies are, what resources you really need. And when it came to the move, that involved a whole new world of things for me. So I looked at that and went, okay, I'm going to continue to learn and develop in these areas. They're complementary to my skills. And in doing that and being a key leader in that move, and kind of professionalizing the business and getting that reporting element, both internally, but also for board of directors and the private equity group, um, it's what eventually led me down the path to having this opportunity to formally become the VP of operations as well. And so, yeah, a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think it's important to understand kind of how that growth worked and some of how I career managed myself, I suppose, because there's always opportunities that pop up that, may be intriguing for one thing or another, a title or money or what have you. But my goal was always about the learning and continuing to build these skill sets and build stories that I could talk to that could help me continue to kind of inch towards, building skills that you could run businesses at a more general level.
Yeah, what stands out about that journey is how intentional you were each step of the way, and I think obviously that's paid off, but it's going to be something that's more and more important for our students as they leave the university is being intentional about building those skills. One more question before I really dig into understanding what you do at Barco. Uh, so you also serve as president for the Grand River Hospital Volunteer Association. Briefly help us understand what that is and why the heck would somebody with a newborn, another child on the way, going for an MBA, VP of Finance, why take this on top of all those other time commitments you've got on your plate?
So as you say it in current day, it does sound a little bit crazy, but
I didn't mean it like that. I meant it more. There must
I,
be some big
yeah.
meaning for you, and I'm just curious that meaning and what we can take away from that.
Yeah, no, of course. So I actually started with the Volunteer Association in 2018. I came in as their director of finance. So again, at the time, and this remains true to this day, I wanted to find a way to give back to the community. I've been very fortunate in a number of ways in my career and in my life, and I wanted to find a valuable way to give back. And that looks different to different people, but I knew if I was going to do something and stick with it, it needed to be something that I was passionate about. And that I could feel that I could add the most value. And for me, that was using business skills to be able to, well, actually, I'll take a step back. What the VA is a not-for-profit organization. We run two Tim Hortons, two gift shops, and we do some ancillary business work throughout the hospitals. But it's about a $2.5 to $3 million top line revenue, not for profit. And yeah, we as a board bring in the right skills that we need to make sure that we can maximize those profits, and we use those proceeds to contribute through donations back to the hospital. So since inception, we've donated over $5 million, and we're looking to really expand that figure over the coming years. So anyways, the context is I could use my business skills. If I can use that to squeeze more to that bottom line and therefore kind of enrich the community with those proceeds, that's the way I would feel I could add the most value giving back, but also stay passionate about it. Because just like anything, consistency is so important. It's at the core of really getting anywhere you want to go. And I knew if I was going to be honest with myself, if I can do something, continue to do it, it had to be there. So.
That's just fascinating. Yeah, great example of sort of again that intention that you had. Uh, so before we dig into Barco, Nancy, maybe I'll turn the floor over to you to see if there's any questions from our students just on Michael's background and if you have any questions.
So far, no questions from the students. So let me make a pitch. We do want to give you guys a chance to ask Michael questions. So please get them into chat, and we'll work them in. Michael, I do have one question. I want to take you back. You skipped over the Waste Canada role reasonably quickly. You and I have talked about that before. And one of the things I found intriguing was the source of some of the data you had. You talked about sort of optimizing routes and that kind of thing. So for a little bit of context, when we talk performance management around here, you've already mentioned one of the three things we talk about, which is strategy. We need some data. That's the part that intrigues me. And we need to understand people, which is the part that sort of intrigues Adam and Wenshin. We all see the big green, I'll call them garbage trucks driving around. Can you just take a minute or two and explain to the students the data you were able to get from those big green trucks that sort of wander around the streets and remove our waste?
Yeah, no, of course. And I'm 3 or 4 years out, but I spend so much time with data. Some of those things will never leave me. But So with any business I've been a part of, there's some version of an ERP system that tracks just about everything that you can about your business. And back in the waste industry, and there's different types of waste streams or like work streams, I suppose. And if I focus on one, we'll call it front end work. So that's the big garbage trucks with the forks in the front that lift overhead. And so one of the things that we had was we had routing software that would track everything about the vehicle, and it would be how fast it's going, where it stops, the route it takes. There would actually also be there's like internal, it's actually more for safety, but geocams that like if there was a big bump, they would record and see kind of what the driver is doing. Was there anything that could have led to that? But anyway, so it would take all of that information as well as all of the waste information of like the weight that was actually dropped off, and you can also get into what was the makeup of that waste and or recycling. And what I would do is I would take dumps of all of this data and be doing analysis on it to understand, you develop metrics of efficiency, which then lead to metrics of profitability to understand, route by route, driver by driver, where are we really making up these numbers? Because you could look at the financial statements and go, well, it's the sum of all of that stuff, of course. But if you've got a 30% gross margin, there's some stuff you're making 40 and 50% on, and some stuff you're making 15 and 20, and sometimes even worse. So, I mean, it's finding the way to dissect, disaggregate your data to really help understand those numbers at a deeper level. And the why behind it. Is this less profitable because you want a less efficient route, or is it because you're picking up less waste than your partner who's doing a separate route, right? Because some of that type of business you're charged you are charging the client based on the waste. And sometimes it's the opposite, that you've just got a fixed contract, you're dropping it off at a landfill, and you're actually getting charged for more. So, I mean, there's a lot of different factors that can drive that. You also get fuel data. Is this actually an equipment issue? Is the fuel efficiency coming off? So we would look at all of these different things to really look at the business as kind of a living organism and all of these different pieces. And I will say that for every role I've had and time I've spent in any finance role, tracking this stuff was really, those data-driven insights are the things that can totally change how you run that business. But anyways, hopefully that answers your question, some of how we leverage that data to make our calls back then.
One quick question, then I'll let Adam take you through Barco, but we've got a question from Akshay here. Why didn't you choose to pivot into other roles like investment banking? You're sort of talking about the private equity owner now. What makes you stay in a role where you can play with business strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there was a period of time where I would challenge myself with that because, let's be honest, some of those roles, the big, sexy, attractive roles of like going into finance and investment banking and all of that. And there was a point in time maybe I'd consider that. But I think through my career, I realized that while I may have been able to be successful in those things and may have had some of the skill sets, it's not what made me really passionate. It wasn't things I was overly passionate about. And people is what I was passionate about. People development, team development, and that's some of the stuff that we'll get into speaking about today. And overall strategy, being able to kind of take something complex and simplify it down. Those are the things that I thought, maybe short-term IB and private equity may have been something that was a bit more flashy and exciting maybe in the moment, but I knew I was potentially going to be developing skills that are a little bit less aligned with the things that I thought longer term in my career would be the things that would really set myself up for the path that I wanted, but also developing those skill sets. And they're phenomenal skills that you can get in those areas, and like ones that would have still benefited the career I'm in today. And luckily I get to do a little bit of both. So I always try to find those opportunities to kind of feather in the skill sets that I'm not finding. But yeah, for me, I think it was finding those things that are properly aligned with what you want to do long term. And actually, that was a big part of why I didn't stay kind of in that insurance realm, because when I was leaving audit and some of that consulting work from EY, there were really lucrative opportunities at the time for me to leave into a role where I was consulting specifically on IFRS 17. and probably more lucrative than any other option I could have taken. And because it was so unique and novel, and no one knew anything about it, and so they were scared and willing to pay big dollars. And I looked at it and went, "Wow, that's enticing." But the last thing I want to do with my life is become an insurance specialist. And that's for me. Some people love insurance, and all the power to you. But I knew it wasn't for me, and so this is going to come back to a theme that I think we're going to continue to touch on, which is making sure you have alignment with your mission, vision, and values, both at a company level, but also at a personal level. So that's kind of what, when I took a step back, really, with any big decision like that, it's like, does it fit the short-term, midterm, and long-term goals and what I really want, what I'm really passionate about? Because there are so many ways to make money if you're a hard worker and you put the time in. But it does come to a point, I'm finding more and more in my career now, that the real winners are the people that can make money and be successful while also finding something that they're happy and really excited and motivated about on the day to day.
Cool. We're starting to get more questions, but Adam, let me toss it back to you, and let's get some info on Barco to help students with that reflection question that Yes is sitting there in chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And so maybe we can just do a quick dive into the context of Barco, and then we'll sort of explore some of the aspects that I'm sure students are curious about. So, Michael, can you briefly describe the operations of Barco? What do you do? The back says pallets, skids, and crates. Safe to assume that's what you do, but can you explain a little bit more about the manufacturing setup, maybe what a typical employee at Barco does, and maybe what a typical Michael at Barco does on a day?
Sure. So yeah, it's pallets, skids, and crates. It's not overly complicated stuff. It's finding, lumber, fiber, raw materials, and there's different types from softwood to hardwood, and some of it you're buying in frame stud lumber looking great.
Michael, let me interrupt.
Sure.
Explain to students what a pallet is. They may
Okay.
not know.
So actually, this kind of looks like a pallet. That's kind of the design there, but it's essential. So skid pallet, it's used in logistics. It's a structure to hold things, and that you can put a fork underneath for the forklift to be able to move it around facilities that all big CPG companies, construction, manufacturing, all use to essentially move something from point A to point B in a simplest form.
So everything we get in a grocery store has come into that store sitting on a pallet, right?
Correct.
All right, keep going.
It is the lifeline of business and
There you
CPG
go.
and manufacturing.
There you go.
It's actually kind of funny because it's not to oversell it, but we have customers, big customers that you guys would know of. I won't say their names, but with us not being able to provide them with pallets when they're out could mean tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars interruptions a day or a week because everything stops. So picture an Amazon where you couldn't pick anything up, or another major CPG company that all of a sudden the orders are there, but they can't deliver. So it is very important. But essentially, it's pulling these raw materials into our facility, it's cutting them down into smaller pieces, and it's assembling them into something of value. And that's a very simplified way to look at it because, like I said, there's softwood, there's hardwood, there's rough, there's different dimensions, there's different treatments you can do to it. And there's certainly a number of different manipulations we do with the wood once it's actually been cut to size, whether you're notching it, you're clipping it, whether it needs to be painted or otherwise. So that's what we do in a nutshell. And it's simple, but same thing. Even with simple items, there is a ton of data that can go with it. Data you'd never even dream of like, how could you get that complex into wood? But you truly can. And as a matter of fact, I do some work with Adam and some of his colleagues on some very deep data dives of some projects we're doing at Barco, all around productivity and motivation, incentive in our piecework that we'll touch on a little bit later. But yeah.
So you mentioned earlier a big interest of yours is people, and what I've gotten to see over the while working with you is how much you enjoy the people management side of your position. How do you approach that part of the job? For example, training within your organization or leadership and how you sort of pass that culture down to your employees. Can you just share a bit more about maybe that day-to-day people focus of your position in that VP role?
Yeah, for sure. So, like I was saying earlier about what draws me to some of these type of roles, it is the people side of things, and I think for me, just relationship and getting close with people and helping people grow has always been something of interest to me. But also, I think learning how to create a high performing team, how to motivate people, helping them achieve their goals, I find very exciting and rewarding. But I also find that it's just incredibly virtuous for a business because in each of kind of the steps I've taken, I've looked at it not as much as like, hey, what can these people do for me, but rather what can I do for these people to help us really leverage our skill sets to our best ability and give more to the business while at the same time individually growing in our careers to help our long-term goals. Um, but in terms of, the different ways to approach that for something like training, my goal is always to understand the individual, because everybody is so different and there's no one size fits all. So I would say that from a leadership standpoint, and also just how I work with certain people, because there's different social styles. Whether you're a driver or you're an amiable or you're an analytic, those people need different things. There's different drivers, there's different motivations, there's different comfort levels, and there's different weaknesses, right? If you're that energetic, charismatic salesperson, your driver, you're the light of the room, but maybe you're not analytical, maybe you're a little less detail oriented, and that person needs to be managed very differently. So I find it starts to get like drift a little bit more into psychology, which is something that again is very interesting to me, because understanding how people work, that is such an important element because people, I think, is really what makes or break businesses and teams, right? Because you could have the perfect product, perfect plan, competitive state in your industry, but if you don't have the people to do it properly, it's really not going to get off the ground. So I just really have always appreciated kind of that human element of things, figuring out the different types of people and then the different patterns that work for them to get them somewhere. So when I look at something like training or motivation, I really try to understand the person, who they are, what motivates them, where they want to go, which is important because if you apply that idea that, of course, everyone wants to be the CEO of this company. No, they don't, right? And some people are motivated more by extrinsic factors, whether that be, just real financial rewards. And other people, they're more motivated by intrinsic factors. Maybe it's recognition, maybe it is investment in their career development. So I've always appreciated that and putting people first, I've always found whether it's, giving them new skill sets, and it is a form of delegation, but it's also if you position it in a way that it's helping achieve their long-term goals, it's really a win-win. And also what you're really trying to do is level everybody's skill set up so that you are, eliminating pieces of everybody's roles that can be streamlined and get them really using more of that prefrontal cortex. And that not only does wonders for the business, but it helps them stay engaged. It helps with retention. It helps with motivation, which supports culture, right? So like, because happy workers are happy people, a happy environment, like all of these things support one another. And so when I look at that, like I want to be happy where I am. And if I've got happy people around me who are doing great work and want to stay here, all of those things, almost like cross-pollinize one another. But when I'm looking at actual training, of course, there's job-specific training for each of these different things. So that's a factor, what is the job that needs to be done? What does optimal performance look like? What are you coming in with? And let's figure out a way to close those gaps. But, I also think you need to understand the person's individual motivations because then there's potentially some training for that. And some of that you can provide. Some of it is education. Everybody on my team is doing some form of additional education that Barco supports just because it's like, hey, what do you need? Where do you want to be? This is what I can provide. This is what we need to sub out. And they love that and it helps them to continue to grow and they feel invested in. The other thing is training must be, in my opinion, specific to the alignment with the business vision and mission as well, and helping people understand why it matters, what they're doing and where they fit into that. Because I find often it's like, okay, here's the specific duties you're going to have. Here's how to do it. See you later. Let me know if you have problems. And like, that's not overly inspiring. And I don't think it's a recipe to keep people. And in this world, there's a lot more movement, and that's expensive. It is tremendously expensive, even for lower paying jobs. Like it's it's incredibly expensive to do the training, and how that slows down productivity. And we've seen that even in our own business when we've had high turnover times. It's like, okay, it might cost five, six, seven, $8,000 to hire that head and get them trained and get them productive. But like, you need resources for that. You need, there's overhead in the office, there's trainers, and when you have other people training on the job, it takes away from their productivity. So that can be pretty disastrous. So under helping people get there and see why their role matters and into the bigger picture is important. But also, if this is your vision, mission, this is who we are, it gives them something to feel proud of, and they know how they're contributing. And also, like, you can't be pointing in the direction of where you want to go and not telling anybody, or you're not going to get there. Right. So yeah, I think as you design those training plans, it's got to be very unique to that individual.
That's fantastic. So we've got a ton of questions and great questions that I'm going to turn over to Nancy in a second, but there was one from Mohit that stands out to me. A lot of what you say has this positive feel to it, a positive vibe, a great culture, a great place to work. But one question comes up and how do you handle delivering difficult news or bad news or maybe reprimanding someone? What does that look like in an environment where you're trying to build this culture of collaboration and togetherness and training and all of us moving forward? What does delivering bad news or difficult news look like in that type of environment?
Yeah, it's a good question. And for all this positivity, I've spent a lot of my career in this world where it's managing folks who you need to be having these tough conversations, where maybe you do need to have performance conversations, or people who it's just they're not quite meeting expectations. And it's challenging for sure. But I do think that a lot of these things, while difficult no matter how you cut it, being transparent, having rapport, good news or bad news, definitely improves the conversation. And knowing that you've got that individual's best interest in mind, and you're considerate of where they are when you're having that conversation, it makes things more manageable. But that's setting the environment. That's your foundation, I guess, to have any type of conversation and have, especially when it's difficult news. But I always try to frame it in a way that is constructive, is supportive, is not blamey, and it's really walking them through. Okay, I just want to walk through some of here's something that we're experiencing or that we're noticing, and it's helping them understand. Okay, this is the impact of that, and sometimes it breaks down some questions and there's challenges to it, and it's giving it I guess the flexibility to kind of let them work it out, because everyone kind of responds to those things differently. And again, that's where tailoring that message and that conversation is incredibly important, because it's not a one size fits all. But at the end of the day, I think it's helping them see what the context of it is, not just you're bad and this is bad. It's it's being careful with your language too. You're not saying it's quite like that, but it's like, here's where it's a little bit off what I'm hoping for. Here's why it matters. Here's some of the fallouts, and here's some alternatives of why I'd like to have it done this way. And here are some of the side benefits of that. And then having a conversation about it. Like I feel like I've never had like a disciplinary conversation or meeting where it was me just grilling somebody on how they're not doing well, but it's having an open conversation. It's asking them like, how do you feel about this? Am I missing something? Like maybe somebody's going through a really difficult time. So I think just like, turning off some of the just fact-based pieces of these things and turning up your EQ button and really being sensitive and watching them and reading them and trying to figure out where some of these things are happening. I think that's where you get people who are a lot less defensive and more willing to kind of tease through that issue. And I've always found that, like, even in these tough conversations, I end up, the person might not be thrilled that I just gave them this conversation, but they leave and go, damn, he's right. and I get it. And then touching base with them and reinforcing when they are doing things well. I think that's something that can often get lost is, as managers, it's you only crack the whip when something's not going well, right? And it's where's that, that pat on the back, that support when you are doing it right. So I think it's making sure that you're continuing to do those things as well. And that's where I think leader character comes in so big, where it's like showing that you're accountable, you're keeping them accountable, but you keep yourself accountable, that you've got integrity, you do what you say you're going to do, that you live with a certain set of principles and values that they know that if it's going well or not well, that they trust that you've got their best interests in mind. And that trust, I think, is what allows you to have really tough conversations sometimes and still be able to make progress and have them be like, okay, well, he's not having this conversation with me because he doesn't like me. He wants me to succeed. And actually saying that too. You are trying to say, I am not doing this to make you feel bad. I'm doing this because I want you to be successful.
That's a great response. Nancy, I'll turn it over to you because again, we've got some fantastic questions from our
Yes. So I'll just pick up on a couple, Michael, because I think you've really touched on them. So I'll just let the students know. I hope they have the answers to the questions. So Shrenika was asking about motivating employees, and you talked about sort of understanding intrinsic versus extrinsic, and who likes all the analytics and who just wants the pat on the back. So hopefully that answered her question. Um, you also started to touch on the leadership piece, and maybe I'll ask you to expand on that a little bit. Uh, Sharyama was asking, how do you, as a leader, bring Barco's values to life? And do you believe employees respond to that when you're trying to actually live the values that are on that website?
Yeah, and I'm glad values were raised because this is something that actually Waste Connections really drove into me, which was the importance of living those values, not just saying them, but living them. And one of the phrases that was brought up back then, and I try to utilize it here, is you need to bring values and culture from head to heart. And in both my previous job and this one, our number one value is safety. And that's because we believe, regardless of the work you do, you should be able to come in and leave in the same shape you got here. And I think it's a simple thing, but it's reinforcing it. It's in any of these values of doing as you say to do, right? And so whether if that's a safety thing, it's wearing all your PPE, it's following up. If you see something, you say it, and that goes about everybody, right? And it's not just we only have safety conversations when there's a safety event. Every meeting we have is a safety meeting because if someone's doing something that's unsafe, we call that out. And I think it's having that kind of be a piece of every conversation and where you're going and reinforcing it, and continuing to talk about it, not just when it's at your annual event where we all give each other high fives for being safe. It's really doing it, and it's making investments in those things. So one of the areas, so we have a joint health safety committee, as is required for a company of our size. But we follow that up with an employee engagement committee where there's a whole section that's focused on safety related items where people can speak up about things they've seen, and we have an accountability now to ourselves to take action, right? Because it's people raising their hands, say, I found an issue, what are you going to do about it? And it's like, well, next meeting we're going to have an update for you. It's safety checklists that have to be done every single day. It's incorporating new rules that when there's gaps, kind of like systemic gaps throughout the organization, you do something about it. You invest in it. Like since our facility moved, there was a lot of stuff that, on the equipment side that was, I would say, underinvested, or at least they were grandfathered in. And it's almost like if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of vibe. And it's like, well, I don't know about that. We may actually have some areas where there's exposures. So we spend tens and tens of thousands of dollars, not because someone told us to, but because no, we've got some real risks here. And if we identify something that could be a possible risk of what could go wrong, what are we going to do about that? So I think it's saying it, it's living it, it's reinforcing it both verbally, but also, put your money where your mouth is and doing that. And that's on the safety front. But the same can be said about really any of those the values that you go by is you need to move it from the head to heart.
Okay. I'm going to go to a question now. from Obafemi, because it may actually help the students get towards what they need to answer in the reflection question. And the question is, and I'm going to put a word in there, but what performance management system have you implemented at Barco that you're most proud of? What was sort of the inspiration for it? And what are some of the outcomes?
So did you say incentives or performance
Um,
management? Sorry.
Anything related to performance management. So sort of performance management system that you've been involved with at Barco. They'd like to know the inspiration and some of the outcomes.
Yeah, so I think I'll tie this to because there were some items in here that pre-existed my time. But one of the things that we put in was a performance management tool that specifically works for the office staff, who I don't really think had a lot of engagement on these things. It just whether it was the size of the business prior, but we wanted to find a way, and we're doing the same thing with our frontline folks of some of what I was saying before is bringing your well, actually, we didn't even have mission, vision, and values, up to a year ago. So it's first create them. And then how do you incorporate that in? So our tool that we now use to evaluate the folks upstairs here is we've taken those values, we've driven it in to, well, 50% of, let's say, their evaluation and their bonus is tied to things that we believe are direct outputs of or inputs for them that are going to be relevant for them to perform well in their specific job related duties. Then there's tasks or evaluation metrics that directly tie to how are you helping the company continue to achieve their goals as it relates to our values and our bigger term vision of where we're trying to take the company. And then there's 50% of the evaluation that's all based on SMART goals. And I call it the big three. So in a given year, I sit down with my team and I say, what is your big three going to be this year? Like, yes, you need to hit your specific duties, expectations. You need to have the vision stuff and hitting the goals. But what are you going to do to improve this business or yourself over the next year? I want to hear those. And I want you to line it up in a SMART goal system, right? Specific, measurable, timely, achievable, all of that stuff. And I need you to pitch it to me. And I love that because it puts the onus on their own development. I don't want to sit here and tell you what those things are. I need you to dig deep and think about what you think those things are. And it doesn't mean what you give me, I'm going to accept right off the bat. It's a bit of a negotiation at that point, and we are going to, figure out, is that the best thing? Is it the priority? Like if I created my list, how close are we? And then, it's tweaking on things that maybe didn't hit one of those elements in the SMART goal. And then it's the consistent support and feedback loops to make sure that people know where they're moving with that. And that was something that I don't think really happened here, or it happened once a year. I think if you're looking to achieve a goal, especially with people, they need it constantly. They need the updates, they need the reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative, to know, am I achieving what you need? And that's where metrics and data become so important. And if you're not providing that, they really don't know how to oscillate one way or another to get closer to your expectations. So that was something new that we implemented here, and I got some great feedback from Adam of some of the things that could help make it more effective. One of which is the things that you are evaluating somebody on, they need to have control over it, because if there are things out of their control, it's not overly effective because they say, hey, it's going to fall where it falls. I can't actually even impact that thing. So that was something we tried to be very, very thoughtful about. But yeah, I think that's allowed us as a group to really level up as individuals and also as a team. And it really is, what you measure, what you monitor, what you communicate is what gets focused on. And when it comes to people development and team, I think it's essential. But yeah, that's something I've been very happy about the progress we've made.
Okay, quick follow-up question on that, then I'll turn it back to Adam. Although I do want to close. There's a really good one here from Yinfei about the future. But just following up on that example, Michael, what's your sense? You hasn't been in place a long time, but can you give us a sense for what kinds of impacts that might have had on employee motivation, on productivity? Are you starting to see that yet?
Absolutely, especially when it's like some of these SMART goals have been, advancing skill sets, right? Going off and done training, done courses. So I mean, that is like just a perfectly measurable thing where you can see someone who's done it, before and after. You see that new skill set, and then you help them apply it. Because one thing I really don't love is send someone off to training and then never talk about it again, and don't incorporate it into the job. It's like, no, help them get there, help them learn those skills, but then put those skills into practice, which is really how that's going to get crystallized in their mind. And if we're going to go ahead and pay for a course, I really hope there's an ROI in there somewhere. So that's something that we've definitely seen. Is we're seeing our group more than ever before skill up in what they provide to the company. And the nice thing that allows is, as they get better and more effective at what they do, all of a sudden there's more capacity. And that's a beautiful thing, because, oh, someone's raising their hand, they've got things that they can continue to help with. Okay, great. Well, I'm gonna help you use those skills to teach you something new that you're going to take off my plate. And you're excited because you're kind of expanding your own mandate, you're learning new things, your boss is kind of challenging you with stuff. But as you do that through the organization and across your team, now I've just picked up some capacity. What can I do that I wasn't doing before? And it's not, hey, let me see if I can find some data entry or something. Like, I'm trying to go at, up to 10,000 feet. Maybe I've been stuck in the weeds, or I'm at 5,000. Like, what are the questions or the threats or opportunities that we've been so busy not to get to, that no one's asking them? And we need to be, to remain competitive and put our best foot forward. And so some of those opportunities have been fantastic, because you get to do the things that you'd love to do or never even knew were out there. But until you have that time, those windows, it's really challenging to get there. So I would say, even in this year, it's been fantastic. And my team is so much, they bring so much more to the table each year. And it's allowed me to bring more to the table. And that's great for competition as someone in this industry. It's great for their development, my development. And at the end of the day, our stakeholders are happy, because they are getting more out of us for the same thing. And well, not quite the same, because as you do that, you do have an opportunity to help people grow financially as well, and in that mandate. But at the end of the day, if you are a more effective, more productive team, your business is making more money. And again, these things kind of pay for themselves. So
Cool. Adam.
Yeah, we're getting close to time, but Yinfei had a fantastic question, Michael, that boy, we could have a whole another hour long, if not more, conversation around. But if maybe you could give us your just initial reactions to it. Yinfei's thinking about, well, the future and market changes, and technology advancements, which are just increasing dramatically all across industries, and I'm sure including yours. Any insights, or maybe earlier you talked about opportunities or threats that you see coming from this emerging tech or emerging market space? Just sort of looking in that glass ball and thinking, okay, what does the future look like? Is there anything that stands out to you for Barco, or just for employee management?
yeah, no, it's a really good question. And on just the more traditional technology side, I think something that could be incredibly disruptive to our industry is automation. And there is significant automation that already exists in this market. The one thing that's, kind of keeps it a little bit at bay is kind of the inputs of the particular raw materials that we use. Because we're not using, in most cases, your what's called, number one, number two, and better wood, framing wood, that you would see at Home Depot. So, we kind of get some of the, lower grade stuff, because it's not really needed to have these like Hollywood pallets for a lot of our customers. That's what we call them. It'll make your product less competitive. But what comes with that, because you need to understand, like, you can look at technology off the shelf and it will tell you all these incredible things it's going to do, but it has certain assumptions. It assumes you're putting good stuff into it, right? And so sometimes the technology isn't actually ready for what your particular use case. So I think one important thing is, while there are going to be advancements, and this goes across many industries, is making sure that the use case actually suits your business. And if not, is it appropriate? Could it be appropriate? And should you be making those investments and changes? Where is that payoff going to be? And then making your call. But trying to think. But in terms of other disruptive stuff for us, I don't think there's going to be incredibly significant things past that. I mean, at the end of the day, you need people, you need raw materials to produce what we do. But on the greater scheme of things, and I'm going to talk more about some of the AI side of things and how that's impacting things, because whether it's people management or how you manage time, and this comes into the capacity stuff I was talking about, I think it's really important more than ever to stay on top of some of the changes in technology, or you're going to be missing out, and you're going to, like, your competition who is using it are going to be moving much faster, right? Because I in my MBA course, I can't remember the exact reference, but I remember we were looking at, how businesses, technology, and people have kind of developed over time. And you see a chart where, like, they're kind of moving around, and it's kind of gone exponential since around 2006. But the gaps between how technology is moving is much more significant than the speed at which people and organizations are able to keep up with it. And that's pretty incredible, because it means that the people who can close that gap faster are going to be the people who are going to exist and remain the most competitive. And I don't really care what industry that is, or whether or just you as an individual, you have an opportunity to be on that cutting edge, or you have potentially the challenges of competing with people who have these incredible resources at their fingertips, and they're using them. And I'll tell you that, OpenAI, ChatGPT, those have become very normal parts of my day to day. And in some cases, it's just because it's a faster resource than a lot of the other, search engines out there. And in other cases, it's giving you a framework. If I need to pull something that's, let's say it's an HR related thing, and I say, oh, I need to be able to policy about something that's compliant with ESA, I can give it some things. And you obviously need to review these things. But okay, it gave me a template. It's pretty good. And now I can build that and take it that next level that AI can't necessarily do, but I've just saved myself some time. And that time for humans to kind of use their, like, higher level reasoning and thinking and creativity that AI is not yet capable of doing, to the level that I think humans still have an advantage. It's leverage the things that are going to become commoditized and table stakes, so that you are really applying your time to that special sauce that you as an individual bring to the table. And whether you're doing that for your own career, whether you're doing it to support your organization, I think that is going to be something that can either, for now, become a differentiator for you, but at a minimum, I do think is going to be something that is an expectation as you move forward.
That is fantastic advice for our students. It's hopefully something that our faculty are echoing in their courses as well. We're bumping up against time, and I got so many more questions, Michael, but I want to be mindful of your day and our students' day. So one final question for you. In addition to the importance of upskilling, is there one piece of advice or something that you found, particularly in your day-to-day, that you would say, hey, for a student getting started in their career, keep your eye on this, or do this, or consider getting into this habit? Is there something that stands out to you that maybe you've either failed with in the past, or something that has driven all the success that you've had in your career?
Yeah, I wrote down a few things on this point because I figured it would come up, especially with so much change going on. But I would suggest, there's continuous development. And as you just said, you should always continue learning. But one of the things that I think can be often overlooked is the EQ side of things. And I think that's a very important part of becoming a strong leader and having a greater shot at hitting a C-suite or the top of your or becoming a subject matter expert. Because there are very, very intelligent people who can hit ceilings because they don't know how to communicate, or they don't know how to manage their emotions, or deal with someone who has some of their own issues. And coming from a finance and analytical people, you look at the social styles. There's a lot of people on this call that would consider themselves analytics. And it's generally some of the analytics that sometimes have a little bit tougher time connecting with some of that emotional side of things. But that's what can make you a bit of a special weapon, because you understand this incredible science that's going on around us with your data and the numbers and everything. But if you can translate that, with some charisma, and you can understand how people are taking that information, and then you're managing people who deal with that. Like, I think that's going to be the thing that takes you from being a very strong executor or finance person to someone who can actually really change the direction and strategy. It's through people. Your data only goes so far. But I do have a couple other pieces here, which is in your leadership experience is try to understand some of the different types of leadership and understand that there's not a one size fits all, and you need to be fluid with your leadership styles because there's different situations that call for them. I'm sure you guys have learned different leadership approaches, different styles, whether you're authoritative, coercive, affiliative, whatever it may be. There is a specific fit where those are good for some situations and not others. And it's not like one is bad or one's better than the other, but learning when to fit those particular leadership styles for the situation, for the individual, is going to be the difference between you having success in some of those situations and not. And one of those I'll say is coercive, where it's like, hey, that's generally not something that people look at as, oh, that's the type of leader I want to be. But when you're in a position where your back's up against the wall, you're in a distress and a crisis situation, you don't have time to ask everybody about what their feelings are and what their motivations are. Sometimes it's, no, we're pace setting. This is where you got to do, and you got to do it now. And this is why. And sometimes that's needed, where other times you need to be creative, you need to be brainstorming, you need to be supportive and hearing people out. So I think that's an important piece. And I think my final piece of advice is learn to get comfortable adapting to uncomfortable things and getting out of your own comfort zone, and learn to run towards the fire. Because I've found myself, and it's a bittersweet thing, because when you go towards things that are outside of your comfort zone and look like an absolute mess, like a monster of a problem, something that's challenging, something that's scary, that's where you are going to grow. It's where you're going to differentiate yourself as being a problem solver, as someone that takes on the tough things that others don't want to, and it's going to show initiative. It's going to teach you skills others won't get, but it's going to build a bit of steel around you to say when things are hard, you've got that strength to kind of push through those things and really difficult things in life. And this goes past your career, it goes into your personal life as well. When you build that strength and resilience from battling some of these things, life day to day does actually get easier, because relativity is an important factor in life. And as you deal with challenging things, the day to day actually gets a lot more simple and calm. So I recommend that people run towards those fire and scary things and push yourself outside that comfort zone.
What a perfect way for us to end this conversation. Michael, a huge thank you. We can't thank you enough for the advice, the insights. To our students, thank you very much for sticking with us on a beautiful Friday. I hope you enjoyed the conversation just as much as Nancy, Wenchen, and I. We thank CPA Ontario for funding and sponsoring this series. And again, Michael, can't say thanks enough for your time. So we look forward to our next conversation in later October. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Friday and weekend.
Thanks
Thank you
for
so
having me.
much. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Michael.